Hey, welcome everybody to the latest installment of MSP Business School. My name is Brian Doyle, and with me here today are my co-hosts, as always, Tim McNeil and Rob Rogers. How you guys doing today?
Doing good. Doing good. How about you?
You know, another busy week, another week in paradise, as they say, right? But I'm excited about what we're going to do today. And as I always say every week, nobody's here to hear us. They want to hear from our guests. And I'm pleased to say that we've got Hartland Ross on with us today. He's the CEO of eBridge Marketing and then the HostBroker and MSPbroker.com, which you may know about out in the marketplace as well. But I'm going to let him do it justice and really talk about what's going on. Hartland, how are you?
I'm doing well, guys. Summer's finally arrived here. I'm in Vancouver, BC, Canada, and we've had a heat wave by this point last year, but it was the opposite this year. So I'm excited. I'm in better spirits. The sun's out. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
And for you listeners, as you can imagine, Tim's already grilled him on hockey before in the pre
We don't
need to cover that today.
It's so funny. Just before we get going, Hartland, we actually had somebody on this podcast at one point that lives in Bob Kenya.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So not too many people would understand that reference, but I assumed you would.
I definitely do. Yeah. There's a Bare Naked Ladies song that references that.
Yep.
Excellent.
With that said, Hartland, maybe tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be in the MSP industry and, specifically doing the things you're doing today.
Yeah. So, guys, we started about just over 20 years ago, I guess, now, pulling out of the dot bomb after 2001 and built a marketing firm really focused initially on web hosting companies, frankly, and helped grow a lot of some of the well-known brands at this point. And over time, as we started to grow those firms, there became more competition, barriers to entry were quite low, and costs continually went up all around from whether it was Google or affiliate fees or whatnot. And as a result, a lot of those groups, as we started to grow them, were looking for alternative options for growth. And so we were quite well connected, spoke at a lot of conferences, and went to events. And so we ended up becoming this kind of go-to, I guess, group for access to other groups, and people would share what they were looking for. And so they decided that some of them wanted to grow more quickly than they could through organic methods, and frankly, in a lot of cases, less expensively. And so we ended up starting this somewhat of an informal M&A process, but over the years, that's become a major part of our business. So fast forward to today, that was 20 years ago with the marketing and about 17 on the M&A side. And fast forward to today, and we support IT service firms now. It's obviously hosting still, but a big part is MSPs, obviously why I'm here today. And we focus on IT only, though. It's so IT services. So very much understand the space. And at this point, we publish a list each week of companies for sale in the space. And with respect to MSPs, that's really a North American focus. Despite I get a question, I'm in Canada, but our opportunities are really North American wide.
Perfect. And the M&A market is so hot today. We're constantly hearing about numbers and, how many MSPs have been acquired. I think, last I saw as we were recording this, it was about 600 on the list thus far. But in our previous conversation, you brought up some good points to what that really means. So maybe you can drill down a little bit further and, let us understand your perspective on those numbers.
Yeah, so we were talking before, and I had a conversation with someone earlier this week who brought up really exactly the same thing, and it's the iceberg effect, right? So if you're seeing reported numbers, and transactions, you're seeing the ones that are being publicly published, press releases and otherwise. But for each one of those, there are many, many more that are going unrecognized, unnoticed, unpublished. And these are going to be the small ones. These are going to be the $500,000 MSP buying the $200,000 MSP, or the $2 million MSP buying the $500,000 MSP. And you know, frankly, due to perhaps in some cases a lack of sophistication or thought to the concept of announcing it, but also candidly, a lot of cases strategically not wanting to announce it to try to not rock the boat with the new customer base, these things go unnoticed. So there's a lot of activity, Brian, as you pointed out. And you know, I like to say that the market in M&A, forget IT, but the market in M&A generally has been hot for a long time. IT, I would say, is hotter. And then COVID, I sort of say that it was really the gasoline on the fire for a variety of reasons that really accelerated the whole thing. And you know, with the don't like to talk about the doom and gloom, but with all the market discussion that's going on right now, and sort of this discussion of looming recession or slowdown or whatnot, that it's conceivable that some things there may change, but you know, the jury's still out there, and nonetheless, it may go from on fire to still being, you know, red hot. So I think it'll still be very active.
Let's stay on that point a little bit. And, you know, as we kind of focus in on some of the smaller buyers out in the marketplace, we recently had Abe Garver from Focus Investment on, and one of the things he was alluding to is he doesn't see the market slowing down from a PE perspective, because that money's already locked in and pledged by the investors. So they're going to be able to continue the gasoline, you know, going to keep that engine running. But how about on the small side? You know, one of the things that typically happens when we have a recession period or a slowdown period is it becomes harder to get money and, you know, borrow money. Do you see that some of those mergers of, you know, $1 million and $500,000 buyers, those $500,000 and $200,000 mergers, those lower end mergers will slow down a little bit just because of some of the pressures that are going to come from this? Or, you know, what's your gut saying to you as somebody on that side of the fence?
I would say that if you were to be able to measure it, and I think that you won't, so it's just all speculation, but if you were to measure it, there probably will be less activity. I mean, we saw when COVID first hit, we saw groups push the pause button, right? Well, I'm not really sure what's going to happen. I think I'm just going to kind of wait this thing out. And we absolutely saw that. On the other hand, we also saw the sort of Warren Buffett's and let's buy low and sell high, right? And so they were aggressive, and they said, nope, this is the time where I should be. You know, there's less competition. I'm going to try to, or maybe I'll get a better deal. I'm going to try to pick you know, pick up on opportunities here. So I think that there's still nonetheless been this, for a whole variety of reasons, again, groups have done well. I mean, generally, it's not true in every case, but IT firms have been a beneficiary of COVID, and their businesses have grown. The whole virtual workforce and whatnot has been a catalyst in that. And so, you know, they're sitting on cash. Even the small guys are sitting on cash, and it may be, you know, modest amount, but it's enough to do something. Particularly if they get some financing, SBA process, you know, loan processes there to support them. So I think it will still continue, and I think that but I do think you'll have some groups who are going to push the pause button, but I think there'll be enough to still you know, carry this thing through in a way that you could still describe as strong. Now, I mean, if this thing lasts for several years, which I don't think it will, then you know, it may be a different story. But in the short term, much like Abe said, you know, there is capital, and they need to do something with it.
Yeah. So let's play this maybe from a different perspective, right? So to your point, I've seen that a lot of times, even recessive times tend to boost up the MSP, because the MSP's got the opportunity to kind of benefit from some of the outsourcing that's required because, you know, companies are trimming their payroll. Do you think this might also be an era where we start seeing more and more distressed assets coming on the marketplace, where, you know, a smaller buyer can really maximize their return by buying somebody that might have lost that key account and just doesn't think they can move it forward, but really does have a decent stable and buy at a lower price?
So it's a complicated, I'm just trying to think of how to quickly answer that, because it's a supply and demand thing. If that opportunity is exposed to enough buyers, then I think that the distressed element will move up to kind of a market condition. If it's Brian, hey, you're distressed and you and I are having a conversation over coffee and it's just the two of us and you, Brian, are not talking to anybody else, then and we hit it off. I might be able to pick your business up and get a pretty good deal on it. So, you know, I think it's kind of dependent on how motivated the seller is to go through that process, because it's work for the seller to do that.
And to your earlier point, because of the amount of demand that's out there, it really starts almost reflecting like what we're seeing in housing these days. There's just enough buyers that are going after that, so the price really won't sink too far.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool.
And also, the seller has to be pretty motivated to sell. You know, we deal with a lot of groups that want to sell, but this is their retirements, or this is they need these funds to tide them over to their next opportunity or whatnot. And so unless they can make it worthwhile, they're not going to do it at any price. Now you end up with exceptions, health issues and otherwise, that force somebody's hand, but not that common.
Okay. So, you know, earlier you were speaking about, you know, the list and how you get everybody on the list, and, you know, that's where everybody comes in. How often is it refreshed? How many deals are coming in? Are you still seeing a lot of seller activity, and is the list growing? Like, what's going on that side of it?
Yeah, so we publish a list once a week. We've got opportunities that come out almost every week. I mean, I'll be honest, there's especially the holiday periods, we will sometimes forego Christmas and the you know, July 4th kind of period, we'll skip a week. But generally speaking, we'll have new opportunities. And you know, I think that in some cases, even in COVID, I mean, we still saw lots of opportunities, and there's a flip side argument to why groups are wanting to list. Sometimes it's an impetus to say, look, I kind of don't want to go through this again, and I want to kind of get ahead of this. There are cyclical periods of it as well, Rob.
Really?
So, yeah, well, we see when the new year starts. So at the end, November and December are actually ironically really busy periods for us. People are planning for the next year, and they're thinking, you know what, next year is the year I'm going to do something different. I'm going to get rid of this business. I'm going to retire. I'm going to focus on something else. I spoke with a guy yesterday who had a day job, but also an MSP. And so he was not running his MSP day to day. He had some people that ran it for him because he was a senior IT manager in a company. And so, but you know, he can't keep both those balls in the air. And he's looking to retire. So easier to get rid of the business now. So we see there's lots of reasons, but there is a little bit of a cyclical nature, and summer tends to be a little bit of a slower time.
It's funny, we've that exact scenario, we've talked to people like that in the past, or MSP owners like that in the past, where they're trying to decide, do I go full MSP, or drop my job, or do I just sell that MSP and kind of go from there? I mean, do you see, have you ever seen like a trend in that scenario where people are like, is there any consistency as far as when people get to that point, they're like, all right, it's time?
I've seen it. Usually it becomes a capacity issue, right? Where they just feel like they have no life. They go from one job to another job, and they after a while of answering support, you know, in the case of hosting, we see it in the hosting space as well, where they're answering support tickets from 8 till you know, midnight or so every day, and then they start their day job and they do it all over again, and then the weekends is when they do the kind of the more proactive stuff in their business. And so they're just working 7 days a week, you know, 16, 18 hours a day, and so they just get to the breaking point where they just can't do it. The other one that happens is where they've actually got a going concern practice, such that they, from a financial standpoint, can justify quitting their day job, if you like, and focusing entirely on the MSP. And I've seen a lot of MSPs come out of those types of situations to be something that now, you know, is entirely supporting. And in some cases, you know, it's still a bit of a lifestyle business, but in other cases, it's a very much a, you know, it's a $15 million business that had a story that started like that.
Yeah, we've had, oh God, I mean, going back, especially in our beginning, we had almost all of our clients started that way, just side gig, and
everybody.
I mean, how many? I feel like this whole industry in a roundabout way was started like that.
Was a side hustle,
Yeah, up until maybe the last couple of years. What's that?
A lot of accidental entrepreneurs, you know, not really setting out that way.
Yeah, very accidental entrepreneurs, and then they get to a point and they're like, well, damn, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Well, and the other big one is that we see is groups that might have been an employee somewhere along the line, or they might have started an MSP at one point and then sold it, and then for whatever reason they decided to come back into the space. Maybe they work for somebody for a bit, and then now so they know what they're doing. They have a bit of cash, and they want to buy themselves a platform, and not a private equity platform, because that would be much larger, but a platform at a smaller scale that they can sort of jump into and essentially create a job for themselves. So we see those as well, as just sort of ways that they've started the business, if you like, is buying a customer base.
I got a question for you. So when these big events happen, you know, the big hacks, right, that happen in the big PSAs, do you see a mass exodus after those big terrible events on the sell side? And does it affect the gap or the ratio?
I haven't seen any. I mean, I've seen people get frustrated, roll their eyes, you know, sharing commentary on forums and so forth, expressing their concerns. But I haven't seen anybody, you know, reach a breaking point as a result. Where I have seen some challenges is situations where a seller migrated off one environment, one platform, and then the buyer comes along using and part of their tech stack is the environment that the seller just moved out of. So now the sellers and their whole team, all the employees, they've gotten frustrated with the environment. They've made a collective decision to move in a different direction, get on a different environment. Now the buyer comes along and says, well, we want to make you an offer, and the offer is great, except for the fact that they now need to move back to their nemesis environment, and the team now has to kind of grapple with that whole situation, and it's probably more disruptive for the team than it is for the customers, but nonetheless, so I've seen that many times, and in some cases it's a deal breaker for the buyer, because the buyer says, look, if you're not in this environment, this stack, we're not interested.
100%. It's a complete cultural shift. You know, and the
training curve,
like the whole stack changed. You can't,
two systems. Oh God.
Hey, Hartland, what is the number one thing that blows up a deal that you've seen out there?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, there are so many. I would say, honestly, probably not what you're going to expect, but I would say trust is, if it's not number one, it's right up there. And that is just where there ends up this erosion of, well, geez, Brian, or, you know, he's what was his intent? What were his intentions with doing that? He you know, I immediately as a buyer go to assume that he had ill intent, right? That he was trying to pull a fast one.
It's interesting that you said Brian there, because I totally agree with you.
It's relevant.
If somebody on this call can do it.
No.
So I think you know, it's that element that starts to erode, because then they start looking for other things, right? Then it's an excuse that all the other things that come up end up being elements that are, oh geez, well maybe this is not the right deal for us, but the trust goes away. So I think that it's crucial that that rapport and trust be established. And I also think that, frankly, and I've seen it many, many times where one group or the other, either side, doesn't give the other group the benefit of the doubt. And so the assumption is that it's immediately they were doing something that was kind of underhanded. Yeah. And that may not be the case. It may have been naivety. It may have been misunderstanding. Usually it comes down to that. So, obviously that's where we try to get involved and try to bring everybody back together again. Sometimes it's beyond repair, but so I think that's what is the catalyst of the problem. It's not necessarily what breaks it apart, but in other instances where that trust may have still exist, the issue can be overcome.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, trust kind of comes with time too, right? Yeah. So, let's kind of maybe play through the process a little bit. I'm looking, Hartland, we're in a negotiation. I'm looking to buy your company. We go to letter of intent. What are you seeing as being an appropriate, time frame maybe for due diligence and get to know before actually closing that deal?
Well, we talk about periods of time for MSPs from the point that we list them to the point that they sell, and you could speak to the buyer for the same answer the same way. The point that they see the opportunity to the point that it closes is somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 months. 4 months is probably a kind of a good figure to work with. And so there's a period of time where, of course, due diligence is being done, not the post LOI due diligence, just the initial due diligence to evaluate the opportunity. And then there's the negotiation process and the getting to know each other process, and then the signing and negotiation of the LOI, and then moving into a post LOI due diligence period, which is 30 days for a very small, simple deal, more likely 45 to 60, and with some of the bigger ones, certainly 90 is quite conceivable as well.
So how many, you've obviously been doing this a fair amount for a while at this point. Like, how many deals get to that point, and like, what's the percentage where maybe somebody loses trust during the process, and out of 10, how many of those deals move forward and the other ones just kind of fall by the wayside?
So with any deal, there's going to be lots of buyers looking at it. The chances of the deal closing from the point at which the LOI is signed. So if it's signed, what are the chances that deal will actually close? Yeah. Our experience is, candidly, we don't track it, because it happens so rarely. It does happen, but I would say you're pushing like 95% of the time that those will close. If you're asking about how many buyers who look at a deal end up signing an LOI, that's a totally different story. But
yeah, I'm sure.
It's I think that, and I know this is biased. But working with a group like us, we're looking to get a deal done that works for everybody. And so we're trying to bring up issues that we have seen can cause problems. And so our experience is when groups have come to us and said, hey, look, whether it's a buyer or a seller, came to us and said that they tried to do a deal on their own and it didn't work out. Yeah. It's actually amazing how many times I do hear groups that when they're on their own, they didn't work out for one reason or another. And in both groups are kind of going through it. For the seller's not a professional seller. They're not selling a business, every year. They don't know what they're doing necessarily. And the buyer might have some experience, might not, but they're still not. Each deal is a little bit different. And so those deals oftentimes will fall apart, certainly far more frequently than we see.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like every MSP that I've spoken to that has purchased their own or have done their own contract with another MSP, has said it was a disaster. And like, clearly it's going to be a disaster. Neither one of you are, both of you are MSPs. You're not bankers. You're not, you're not professional in those contract type of negotiations. Even if you have accountants and, lawyers involved, you still don't know all the things you don't even know. So I totally get that. And I agree with you when you were saying that a lot of the deals aren't even announced in the marketplace. Most of these peer groups who, one peer group member says to the other peer group member, hey, why don't we, partner up here? That's not getting announced.
Yeah.
Right. I know two of our clients did not announce.
Yeah.
So
I know of at least two.
Yeah, at least two.
calendar
And
year.
I just mean in the last few months, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just, it's crazy out there. So I totally agree with you guys that 600 number that you were saying, Brian, is, I think that's significantly lower than what it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are a ton. And then there's others that are kind of quasi acquisitions as well, right? Which is, hey, I've got a break fix book of customers, and I've been offered, like we had one fellow, he was offered a job by one of his customers who was making more money by working in-house with one of his customers than his business was generating. So he took the job, and then he basically sell the customer base for a referral fee. Is it an acquisition? I guess you could call that, but it starts to.
I love that piece, because when we were doing some acquisitions a number of years ago, we used to announce the mergers of equals, if you will, right? If we were buying somebody of substance that was similar to us, we would make that announcement, because it just, perceptually for our client base was, continuing to invest and become more powerful. We had a merger where we brought somebody exactly like you said, Hartland, and he was very upset that we weren't going to announce this big transaction. And I won't go into who they are, but I'll say the transaction was $12,000.
Yeah.
We bought his book of business. We bought his book of business, and we employed his tax.
That's right.
Funny. Right. Yeah. That sounds better, right? Yeah.
So I think we're getting near the end of our time, correct, Rob?
Yep. Getting near the end. Hey, Hartland, before we kind of close it out here today, do you have any closing thoughts before we kind of break away?
Well, look, if you're a buyer or a seller and you're interested in having a conversation, I'd love to chat with you. There's a lot of nuances with transactions, and if you're looking at doing your first transaction, or frankly, even if you've done one or two or three, I think that we may be able to help find opportunities for you and facilitate that process. I think that there's some key components to a deal that are important to cover, and given our time today is sort of wrapping up, it's not going to be possible for me to cover them all, but essentially looking at evaluating opportunities and how you do that, how best to approach those things, and happy to have a conversation with you there if you'd like.
Sure.
Valuations, what are we seeing there, how to structure a deal. There's it's not a science, it's very much an art. There's not really a right and a wrong, but there are variations there, and certain types of deals, for instance, if there's no contractual revenue, how do you structure that, and using an earnout, and what does that look like, and so forth. And then there's kind of deal terms that, as I mentioned earlier, that we see as being sometimes coming up too late in the game. And they end up derailing the deal, whether it's be indemnification caps or legal jurisdiction. Sometimes people are chest pounding over what state the legal jurisdiction should be in, and they can't agree on that.
Hartland, that can't be true.
I mean,
can
you imagine blowing up a deal over that?
You think?
Oh, come on.
Oh my goodness. Could you imagine? I'm in Connecticut. It's going to stay in Connecticut. You're in New York. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
It's
okay.
Usually that one can be overcome, but there's a lot of kind of
pride,
thinking and pride that goes on, and posturing perhaps in some cases. And of course, the attorneys don't necessarily always help, because they're trying to do their job, but they're saying why it should be in one jurisdiction or another. There's also this issue of indemnification and agreeing to those terms. Another one that I think is important if you're talking to a seller and you're just doing your own deal and you're just having a conversation at Starbucks with somebody, is making sure that the seller has gone through the mental exercise of understanding the tax consequences. We've seen deals where, oh, geez, as a seller, I didn't talk to my CPA about any of this. Now I got an offer, and by the way, the buyers now spent several weeks doing their due diligence and making the offer and structuring it. The offers come, the seller goes and takes it to their accountant and says, geez, I didn't realize that out of the $1 million that you're going to give me, I'm only going to get to keep, I'm exaggerating, 200,000, that's not enough. I have to pay all this tax. And so, you know what, I can't do this deal. And the buyer's going, wait, what? You didn't figure this out already? Like, you should have known. Like, did you even see that coming?
Yeah. How do you?
And then derails the whole thing. So, hey, have you already figured out what your tax liabilities are associated with this, and are you comfortable with that? And if they have said they're comfortable with it and they understand, great. If they haven't, I would highly recommend that they go through that exercise. And it might blow the deal up, but you're better to blow it up on that first Starbucks meeting than 2 or 3 months later when you've spent all the time and energy on it. So there are these types of things that are important to cover.
And it's the HostBroker list, right?
The hostbroker.com and the MSPbroker.com. Yeah.
HostBroker.com.
The THE. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, Hartland, I really appreciate you being on here today. For everybody who's listening, I think there's 2 major points to take away from this episode. One, you're an MSP. You're asking your clients to outsource to you because you're a professional in IT. I think you need to outsource to a professional when you're doing M&A. Don't try and wing it and go for it yourself. Or when you do, the next time, go to a professional. And number 2, you said earlier, Hartland, that I think you said that the list is updated and refreshed and new stuff comes up every single week or close to every single week.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Generally, we try to, that's we strive for that and typically hit that. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks everybody for watching today. We will be including Hartland's LinkedIn information with the podcast, and this episode will be up on mspbusinessschool.com and anywhere that you get your podcast. Fellas, I really appreciate it today. I love talking about this kind of stuff here, and I wish you guys all the best and look forward to talking to you soon.
Good having you on.
Thanks for
Hartland.
joining us.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.